Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the second segment of this very dynamic interview. And I asked the question to both Tariq and to Amir. So, Amir, I want you to go right into addressing that particular question and give me your thoughts on that.
Indeed, just to recap, and that is with regards to I referenced Stellenbosch University specifically, that has a history, as well as UCT has a history of benefiting of the struggles of our forefathers with regards to entrenched colonialism, thereafter apartheid. As I said earlier on, people like Hendrik Verwoerd, the architects of apartheid, came out of institutions such as Stellenbosch University. And today they advocate, or claim rather, that they are advocating for inclusivity and for reform, but it is not necessarily what we are seeing on the ground, whereby just in the week now past, Stellenbosch University has not gotten enough votes from the Senate in order to have a full academic boycott against the Zionist state of Israel being declared. But at the same time, even though that might be the situation as far as the university senate goes, I just want to salute and honor all of those students on the ground, because even though the university senate might not have adopted the academic boycott against the Zionist state of Israel, with regards to the mobilization on the ground of students and all the student movements, irrespective of what dimension or what different background they come from, they've all been involved greatly in ensuring that the university senate was part of that mobilization strategy, whereby they could rather get the university senate to ensure that ties were cut with the Zionists. And there are even many academics that are there in the University of Stellenbosch that try their utmost, so we are not trying in any way so to push away the efforts that they have struggled towards. On all of these universities, specifically Stellenbosch University and UCT, there are forces that are trying to bring about better reform to the universities, but at the end of the day, it seems that there is still elite groups there among those campuses, amongst the Senate, that is, of course, trying to still get their way. And that comes back to the question that Dr. Quraysha posed earlier on, and that is we should seriously now consider going towards government, speaking to government officials in the higher education department and seeing how we can get the government, which took a principled stance, to basically ensure that certain sanctions are placed against these universities that are still promoting that same old style of the colonial style background into ensuring that things get its way done, not only internationally, but also locally with our students. I firmly believe that's the only way in which we can ensure that there will be proper reform happening. Otherwise, the same old thing will be happening from time to time.
No, you're absolutely right. And Tariq, you're part of a political party, the biggest political party in South Africa at the moment. Do you think that the ANC should legislate? Because ultimately, if you do not break ties with the apartheid state of Israel, and we know without a shadow of a doubt that what is happening in Gaza is a genocide, it's just a matter of time, for the ICJ to rule on that. Hopefully, they stay true to justice. All of these universities that continue collaboration with them are participating in and complicit then in the genocide, because they are still empowering these organizations and institutions to continue what it is that they're doing. And many of the universities are very complicit with the IOF, the Israeli Occupation Forces. So right in the heart of our country, in the heartbeat of our society, which is the university campuses, we have institutions, organizations, and individuals who are actually complicit in a genocide. So how will you, as a student activist now, hold the state accountable in terms of holding the university accountable and forcing that, if you're South African, you cannot stand and support a genocide?
Absolutely. I think the first step would be to understand the discussion that often student activists have, and also having been a member of South African Students' Congress, a stance that we often engage on is the idea of institutional autonomy. My own personal view and the view of the organizations I'm part of have always been that institutional autonomy has allowed institutions to continue to exist as they had existed pre-democracy in South Africa. And so the point is that my own argument would be that we need to be able to see far more centralized governance when it comes to the question of institutions of higher learning, because through more centralized government, what we tend to see is then the ability to be able to hold those who are put in charge of institutions accountable. The unfortunate reality is that whilst the people who created apartheid were very evil, they were also very intelligent. And they knew that at some point in time, the apartheid system would fall apart. And so they designed university systems in such a, well, they designed society in such a way that the sort of inequalities that had been created by apartheid perpetuate themselves post-democracy. And so the way that we would need to address that is to call for, number one, far more student involvement in decision-making processes, but more important than that is to be able to centralize education within South Africa, because the fact of the matter is that for the very reason that we see institutions continuing to support genocide throughout the world, for that matter, being very close to the Americans or to the EU for that matter, in addition to the fact that they're close to the Israeli state, they're exactly the same reason that they continue to ensure that students from the working class are disenfranchised, don't have access to basic services, and continue to suffer academically. So again, a far more centralized approach to higher education is what I would argue for.
Yeah, and Azra, you wanted to add something to that whole discussion as well about the importance of holding the universities to account and considering what it is, how it is that they continue to perpetuate. Because exactly as Tariq said, the society has been designed that way. And if anything, we have seen now that there is no such thing as human rights for all. There is no equality for all, and there's certainly no understanding of a humanity of all people. So what are your thoughts on these?
I think as students, throughout school and even more in university, we're always told to question, ask questions. At universities, we have modules on decoloniality, critical thinking, but I think sometimes we forget that what does that actually mean? And we actually need to be asking questions, not so much just about the books or what we're learning, it's asking questions about society. Asking questions about those in power, asking questions about the university, the way things are structured. I think there's that disconnect. How can we go to university and learn about decoloniality when we see these colonial structures just keep being perpetuated? I think that's what students really need to realize is how do we put that onto the ground? How do we make that really matter? These are not just theoretical things. I think that's really important. And as Ami said, there are a lot of students who are doing a lot of groundwork, and I think we can definitely salute them. It hasn't been easy for the students who have been at the encampments. I know at Wits on the first evening it rained, but they were still out there. And I think the students also thought about it and questioned, and they said, imagine how scared they felt. First, they felt scared of university security coming to chase them away, especially at night. Then they were cold in the rain, but they thought to themselves and they said, how are Palestinians feeling? How are they living with a reality so much worse than this? And like they said, they knew that in the morning they could call their friends, tell them to bring them more things. What about the Palestinians? And I think that's really important, just to ask questions.
Tariq, at the University of Pretoria, for example, these issues of injustice perpetuate right across the board, and you're currently facing a particular issue as well because you're an outspoken, active student leader, and I saw that during Christmas fall that all of the student leaders who spoke out were sanctioned by the university. And they fabricated charges against them, suspended them, ruined their entire year, and then towards the end of the year dropped all charges. But by then it had cost the students a year. So this seems to be a tactic that university management seems to be continuously employ. And right now you're also being prevented from registering for a postgraduate degree. So what is the actual issue at the university, and how do you envision a way forward in challenging the university establishment for your simple democratic right, the right to question, the right to be an active participant in a democratic state, and in the university, which is considered a democratic microcosm of the larger state?
I think to just provide a little bit of context, for me, it's a case of, or at least on a matter of principle, the fact of the matter remains that institutions continue to perpetuate themselves. And within that context, we begin to understand that for as long as students are kept out of decision-making structures, for as long as workers are kept out of decision-making structures, you'll always have so-called radicals or people like myself or many other student leaders who begin to question and to organize and mobilize around ideas that challenge the institution. And until such a point that our voices no longer need to be heard through protest, but through boardrooms, until such a point that we're allowed and empowered to be able to contribute towards discourse that defines the institutions that we supposedly are in charge of, we'll forever be fighting an uphill battle. And so you'll always have the institution, whether it be the University of Pretoria or any other institution for that matter, that will continue to try to disenfranchise and deorganize the student body by taking away those people who can and sort of attempt to bring some sense of like consciousness around the issues that students and us as a collective are facing. And so it is extremely unfortunate, but again, on a matter of principle, I'm but one student. I can be prevented from registering, but what happens when it's a student who's in a position where they can't do anything about it? They don't have any agency. And that's exactly why, for me, what's happening right now is almost more infuriating, is that it's about the precedent that it sets. Because again, I have an honors degree in plant sciences. I can try to find a job and try to find employment, but until such a point that I can guarantee that I'm leaving an institution in a position, or at least leaving the student body in a position that they are much stronger than when I arrived, I simply can't see why I shouldn't fight that matter.
Thank you, but we're right at the end now. So I would like to say thank you very much to all of you for participating and sharing these insights. And I just want to leave with this particular thought, and I want everybody to think about it, because somebody was asked, I watched on the X feed, I can't remember, it was Rania Khalid, and she was asked that, do you condemn Hamas, the resistance movement? And she said, I can never condemn any resistance movement for taking up an armed struggle in the same way as we cannot condemn the slaves for shooting the plantation owners. And I think that is the kind of narrative we need to conceptualize, to reflect upon, and stop being told how to respond to our suffering and our oppression, because that is what the oppressors do. That is what the colonialists do. They try to create the frameworks around the narrative and also the way in which you should respond. And the students are actively engaged in these alternate discussions, and they're also challenging the way in which the entire white supremacist structure has been created, and as Tariq said, to perpetuate the colonial system in our lives today. It's really time to break free. And I would like to see the Muslim students and Muslim academics far more active on our campuses right across the board. Please, the time for sleeping, the time for saying it's not my problem, or the time for saying I'm afraid, that has way passed. We have to make a stand, because remember, you're enjoying all of these privileges because of those young students who were unafraid, who put their bodies on the line at Sharpeville and other protests throughout South Africa. They made the sacrifice. The turn is yours. Fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the second interview today with my wonderful guests. The future, my hope always just rests on these young people and the incredible resilience that they show, how they keep coming back and fighting for a better world. As Azra said to us in the last interview, we're part of the future, but we're very much present. And yes, I think sometimes we forget that you are very much present. So welcome again to Azra Sidat and to Amir Adams, who's online. Both of them are part of the MSA Union, and they're heading the politics portfolio. And then we have Tariq Lala, who's from the University of Pretoria. He's a student activist. And today I want to start this particular one, Tariq, with you. What we have seen across the campuses in the world has been, a bright spark, a moment of reinvigoration. But what we do know is that whenever there has been change in a society, it has come from the youth. From the time, if I take it theologically back to the time of Prophet Moses, it was the youth who gave him support. It was the youth who brought the change that allowed him to tackle the Pharaoh. The support did not come from the older people. So the youth have always been that particular, spark that initiates the change that is necessary. And we know from the student protests in South Africa during apartheid, that was the spark that brought about the change. Now, you at the University of Pretoria, I also at the University of Pretoria. It's a very difficult university to be in, and I still maintain that till today when I go in, I genuinely feel like I cannot breathe. And this has persisted since FISMAS 4. What is your understanding of activism at the University of Pretoria? And I want you to contextualize it in specifically with regards to the genocide in Gaza. The fact that the University of Pretoria has been a significant contributor to apartheid and apartheid policies, was exceptionally repressive of the students during FISMA's fall. Has the university learned anything? And is there an official statement from the University of Pretoria with regards its collaboration with apartheid backers?
I mean, yes, the first comment that I'd like to make very briefly is that I think young people have the most to lose by the future not changing, and that's why we've seen that change happens often with the youth. And in saying that, I think when it comes to particularly the University of Pretoria, as you mentioned, it has always maintained this idea that somehow it's a university for the people that it was designed for, and we're there to fill the numbers, unfortunately. And so that brings us then to the whole question around the institution maintaining relations with apartheid institutions, and itself having been an institution that was quite robust during apartheid. I think is very symbolic, but more symbolic or more than just symbolic is the fact that it continues to maintain the same sort of systems and behaviors that it had during FISMA's fall, but even before, pre-democracy in South Africa. And so unfortunately we've not seen anything coming from the university, despite the fact that the university does for a fact have ties both within the context of South African Zionist institutions, very close ties to a number of those institutions. But I think further than that, there are connections to Israeli institutions, and unfortunately the university has not seen an active shift, despite the fact that it has been raised in council, it has been raised in Senate for many years by many student activists, including myself, over the past 2 years. And we've not seen much change, but that means that at least we can then, or we have the opportunity then. I know the PSC at the moment is actively trying to pursue some sort of change, and I think it would be then very beneficial to work with the PSC, and I think for people who are interested to be able to support the Palestinian Solidarity Committee on our campus, who are doing a lot of good work, and hopefully we will see a lot of change subsequent to their actions.
Okay, so Azra, you mentioned today that the WITS Senate is going to vote in terms of divestment. And then we'll ask Amir about what's happening in the Western Cape. But tell us a little bit about your experience. I mean, you've also been in the University of Pretoria. You have encountered firsthand also the kind of repressive tactics that the management uses. So combining those two campuses, WITS and UP, what do you see in terms of student activism? And do you think that the students at the University of Pretoria have the potential to engage in the kind of activism that we see happening at both WITS and the University of Cape Town?
Yes, so like you said, I'm from the University of Pretoria. I've been involved with WITS through MSA Union, working on their WITS Liberated Zone, which we've seen, which has really been amazing to see the students being able to mobilize the way they have. And I think it started as an international movement. So it's really, it's the students in America and in Western countries who really spark this movement everywhere, which I think we can take lesson from. I think those students have a lot more to lose than we do as students in South Africa. And yet we haven't seen the same sort of mobilization that we've seen in these Western countries. I think the students in our campuses are still a bit too apolitical. And another big thing, which I think we've seen happen in the West, which has made their protest so successful, is how they've been able to be really united. And I think in South Africa, this is something that we're still struggling with on our campuses currently, is really having a unified voice of students, students who can stand up for what's right. I think no matter which student organization you come from, whether you're from the MSA, the Hindu Student Society, the Socialist Youth Movement, to all realize that you all stand for doing what's right. I think that's really important in times like this. And I think we're slowly starting to see that at WITS, and hopefully we'll see that at other campuses as well. But I think, like you said, it's this culture of intimidation, which we see from our universities. And I think you can see it in the students as well, that they're scared. And I think that's my message today, is to really say that the power does lie with the students. Don't be afraid of the universities. I think we need to remind ourselves that these are public institutions. The universities serve us. The universities also fall under the Constitution of South Africa, which protects these freedoms. And actually not just protects his freedom, these academic institutions should be the one championing these things. And they claim to on paper, but they don't. And I think it's up to students to actually hold them accountable. And I know you said the vote is about divestment. I think in South Africa, they haven't even disclosed to us fully. So I think the first call in South Africa that we're actually calling universities to is actually transparency. I think there's no doubt that there are ties, especially when you see the intimidation and the censoring of students who are mobilizing for Palestine. So I think we're calling on all universities to be transparent and then to follow any BDS academic boycott campaigns, and even just to take a bold stance. How can you be universities that stand against apartheid, stand against injustice, but you can't take a stand when there's a genocide happening? I think that's really important. And for students to stand together and realize the power that we actually have, I think that's really, really important.
So, I mean, coming to you now, there's 2 points that Azra raises. And the one point, of course, is the division amongst the students on the campuses. And secondly, to create this openness, this transparency, right? You gave us a beautiful introduction in the previous interview about the legacy and the footsteps that you walk in terms of students in the Western Cape. Firstly, I want to know, do you find that you have this division on the campuses where students are not able to come together as one body because they have been so indoctrinated in South Africa over the years through the legacy of colonization and the key fundamental tool strategy used by the colonialist was to divide and rule. So we're still in that particular mentality where we haven't been able to consolidate ourselves as a society, as a community, and even as a community of students. But in the West, they don't have that particular problem because they did not encounter the coloniality and colonialism that we faced in South Africa. That's the first question. And the second question then is in terms of transparency, how effective are you in the Western Cape in forcing openness and accountability from university in actually knowing what it is and they're investing in, and is the university actually complicit financially and academically in supporting the genocide?
The first part of the question here in the Western Cape, if we look at the universities where we struggle the most to ensure that the academic boycott actually happens, the 2 main universities being none other than the University of Cape Town, UCT, as well as Stellenbosch University. All the other universities, alhamdulillah, we've had success with regards to finding out what the status of the university is, and of course its divestment as well as its boycott efforts pertaining to the Zionist state of Israel, including my university, UWC, which can do more, by the way, as well as all of the other universities such as the CPUTs. But when it comes to UCT specifically, with regards to ensuring that we move away from that, era of colonialism and apartheid, the students has tried their utmost, and as they are encampments by bits, there are students who are also engaging in encampments right now as we speak by the University of Cape Town, ensuring that UCT takes a much more progressive stance in ensuring that the academic boycott is ensured pertaining to boycotting the Zionist state of Israel. And there were 2 motions passed in the previous weeks whereby finally there were some successes from the student movements in ensuring that the university took a much more rigorous stance towards the Zionist state of Israel. That is as far as UCT is concerned. As far as Stellenbosch University is concerned, I always said personally, I don't want to go to Stellenbosch University just because I know, and we all know, that Hendrik Verwoerd, the architect of apartheid, came out of Stellenbosch University. I always said that, I don't want to go to Stellenbosch because I just know that fact. But with regards to what is currently happening there now, it's sad to see that unfortunately that legacy is still continuing, whereby there was no success from the Stellenbosch University Senate in ensuring that the academic boycott was fully adopted, or of course, to ensure that the Zionist state of Israel was boycotted. So it is an unfortunate event that had happened, that transpired just a few days ago, and we are currently monitoring and ensuring that all of the students, they are actively engaged in ensuring that they try their utmost to ensure that there is some progress with regards to the Stellenbosch University Senate. And it goes so much for a university that says they're trying to become inclusive, especially with the history, having had people that came out of that university, such as the architects of apartheid in South Africa, and they said they're moving away from that, yet they don't want to take an academic boycott, or they don't want to ensure that academic boycott is launched against the Zionist state of Israel. That speaks about the current state of affairs that is happening there at that university. With regards to the question about ensuring that there is, even before coming to transparency, with regards to what Azra also referred to about unity being the foremost in our universities. Alhamdulillah, I will say that there is a great amount of unity among certain groups within the university campus, where people might have disagreements, and sometimes it is very good disagreements that they have with people. We'll always advocate that the students should be able to agree to disagree. We will always have disagreements. For example, where people are going to take now the means of having, the awareness against the Zionist state of Israel. Are you going to take it from a secular front? Are you going to take it from the Islamic front? Are you going to be using, the means of advocating for the resistance movements? Or are you coming through with the other postmodernist movements that advocate for LGBTQI and so forth, that goes against the core tenets of Islam? These are the debates that happen among students at times. And even though these debates are necessary and we have to have them, at the end of the day, we have to ensure that when it comes to standing up against the enemy and standing up against the oppressor, we are always trying strategically so to ensure that all our efforts goes towards having that academic boycott put in place. There's much more details regarding this, but that is just to give, an overall view with regards to what we're trying to do in the Western Cape. And then finally, with regards to transparency, from the university management sides, we have not been informed of any form of transparency as far as Stellenbosch University has gone. We've just been given results as to what the Senate vote turned out to be, as well as UCT. But alhamdulillah, with the other universities, we had some clarity with regards to the rectors himself coming out and issuing statements against the Zionist state of Israel. So with regards to Stellenbosch University, I think that would be our main element, our main problem that we have to counter. And UCT also to a certain extent, but alhamdulillah, we've had success on the other universities in the Western Cape as well.
So, Jazakallah for that. We have to go to a break because the time is up for this particular segment. But when we come back, Amir, I would like you to just very quickly address this, and then Tariq, I want you to add on to it. That isn't it ironic that previously or historically white universities are the universities that are still rejecting the notion of the full humanity of the Palestinians, firstly. And secondly, these same historically white universities who've been singing the song about democracy and human rights for everybody are the very universities that want to go to a secret ballot when it comes to voting on the humanity of the Palestinians. So what does that say about our universities now, 30 years down the line? And is it the responsibility of students now to challenge these particular institutions and the management in these institutions? Is it necessary for students to hold the government accountable, because the government subsidizes these universities, to say that, you know what, there is no change really happening and we need some kind of assistance, because if not, students are constantly going to be repressed? But we'll raise these questions after the break.